now, in the Horn of Africa, global powers are spending, I mean, literally billions of dollars to secure their slice of the Red Sea.
Yeah, billions.
Right, billions. And at the exact same time, they are seemingly ignoring the literal collapse of the countries bordering it. It's just a staggering contradiction.
Oh, it really is. It's wild when you look at the contrast.
Exactly, because you have the world's most advanced militaries policing the waters, while on land, historical rivalries and civil wars threaten to just burn the entire region to the ground.
Hmm.
And the stakes for you listening to this right now are incredibly direct. We're talking about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is this narrow waterway where roughly 12% of all global trade funnels through.
12%, that's massive.
It is. The supply chains for your smartphone, the components for electric vehicles, the fuel that heats homes across the globe, it all relies on this one geographic choke point, not descending into total chaos.
Defense ministers and trade officials awake at night.
For sure.
Because the Horn of Africa isn't just like another region on the map. It's the physical hinge connecting the Mediterranean Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Arabian Peninsula.
Right. It's the center of everything.
Exactly. You've got emerging economic giants, historical regional heavyweights, and, well, urgent security crises all colliding in a space that basically dictates the flow of the global economy.
Which makes the recent behavior of the United States in this region incredibly fascinating. And honestly, that's the primary mission for today's deep dive.
Yeah, it's a very sudden shift.
It really is. Because for years, U.S. foreign policy in the Horn of Africa was largely characterized by what geopolitical analysts called a strategic drift.
Right, just kind of floating along.
Yeah, Washington seemed distracted, lacking a cohesive plan, often just reacting to whatever fire was burning the hottest. But suddenly that drift has been replaced by this flurry of high-level diplomatic activity.
And we're leaning on a brilliant piece of geopolitical analysis to decode this shift today, right?
We are. It's by Dr. Shimit Mengus Ngusu. His paper is titled, "The Horn at a Crossroads. Is Washington playing checkers while others play chess?"
Such a great title.
It poses a brilliant question. We need to figure out if Washington is actually, executing a grand master plan to stabilize this vital region, or if it's just, scrambling to grab what it can before the whole system collapses.
Yeah, and the shift in Washington's posture is undeniably abrupt. I mean, we're witnessing moves that, on the surface at least, look like serious geopolitical maneuvering.
Like what, specifically?
Well, for example, the U.S. State Department is proposing sanctions relief for Eritrea,
Uh.
which is a country that's been heavily isolated by the West for years.
Right.
And they're simultaneously institutionalizing this brand new formal bilateral structured dialogue framework with Ethiopia.
That's a mouthful.
It is, yeah. But there are also open discussions about lifting long-standing arms restrictions and just a really visible push to expand trade and security cooperation across the entire Horn.
It's a massive pivot. To put it in perspective for you listening, it's kind of like watching a friend who has been sitting on the couch for years, eating junk food, and suddenly they start hitting the gym twice a day and meal prepping.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. You can't help but look at that and ask, okay, let's unpack this. What is the end game here?
Right, like are they training for a marathon or just trying to look good for a high school reunion?
Exactly. And that gets right to the heart of the debate Dr. Ngusu outlines. He breaks down this diplomatic flurry into two highly contested interpretations.
Yeah, so the first interpretation is what we might call the optimistic view, right? The return of strategic statecraft.
Okay. The chess theory.
Exactly, the chess theory. This argues that Washington is quietly attempting to rebuild a regional architecture to stabilize a neighborhood caught in, well, multiple overlapping crises.
And the neighborhood is definitely on fire. I mean, you have the devastating war in Sudan, which has displaced millions. You've got persistent instability and militant threats in Somalia, the rapid militarization of the Red Sea by various global powers, and of course, the deeply ingrained tensions between Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Right, and in that totally chaotic environment, the strategic statecraft theory argues that you simply cannot fix everything at once.
You have to triage it.
Exactly. You have to find a cornerstone. You have to pour a foundation that can anchor the rest of the structure. And for the United States, that anchor state is clearly Ethiopia.
Which is just an undeniable reality of geography and demographics, right? You
Mm.
simply cannot bypass Ethiopia if you want any lasting influence in the Horn.
No, you really can't.
I mean, it's a country of over 120 million people. It's the diplomatic capital of the continent, hosting the African Union headquarters.
Yep.
It holds massive economic potential and has a historically formidable military capability. If Ethiopia collapses, the resulting shockwaves pull Sudan, Somalia, and Eritrea down with it.
And that's the exact mechanism behind this new bilateral structured dialogue framework we mentioned earlier.
The mouthful.
Right, the mouthful. Under the optimistic view, this agreement isn't just a ceremonial handshake or a standard trade deal. It's an attempt to create permanent institutional links.
Like hardwiring the connection.
Exactly. By establishing formal working groups on security, the economy, and governance, Washington is ensuring that when the next crisis hits, those communication channels are already there.
They aren't scrambling for phone numbers.
Right, they want a pre-existing architecture to manage the fallout.
Okay.
It's a deliberate effort to bind the region's heavyweight to Western diplomatic structures.
Okay, so if Ethiopia is the cornerstone of this chess strategy, how does the move with Eritrea fit in? Because Dr. Negusu points out that the U.S. is considering sanctions relief for Asmara.
Right, which seems counterintuitive to some.
Totally. Eritrea has often been described by analysts as, the North Korea of Africa due to its intense isolation and highly militarized society. Easing sanctions seems like a massive concession.
Yeah.
What's the mechanism there?
Well, the mechanism is basically calculated risk management. If you heavily sanction and isolate a country like Eritrea, you leave them with absolutely nothing to lose.
And a state with nothing to lose is dangerous.
Very. An isolated state naturally gravitates toward alternative partners, perhaps Russia or China, or they resort to funding proxy conflicts just to maintain some kind of leverage.
Ah, okay.
So by dangling the prospect of sanctions relief, Washington is attempting to offer an economic lifeline.
I see.
The strategic trade-off is clear. The U.S. opens the door a crack, offering diplomatic and economic engagement in exchange for Eritrea stepping back from destabilizing its neighbors.
To prevent another war.
Exactly. The immediate goal is to prevent a reignition of the catastrophic conflict between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the Tigray region. It's a preventative chess move.
Okay, I understand the logic of that theory. Securing an anchor state and neutralizing a spoiler state makes sense, on a whiteboard.
Right, on paper.
Yeah, on paper. But here is where I struggle with the optimistic view and where I think Dr. Negusu's analysis really sharpens its teeth. If Washington is supposedly building this grand regional architecture, they are blatantly ignoring the massive structural cracks in the foundation.
Oh, absolutely.
The glaring omissions in their diplomatic strategy make the entire chess theory look incredibly hollow.
The omissions are vast. When you look at the reality on the ground versus the diplomatic press releases, the gaps in U.S. strategy become the most defining feature of their policy.
Yeah, take the Pretoria Agreement, for instance. This was this peace deal signed in late 2022 that paused the civil war in the Tigray region.
Right, a war that resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths.
And nearly collapsed the Ethiopian state. The U.S. helped broker that pause, yet now Washington isn't visibly doing the heavy lifting required to strengthen or fully implement that agreement. It's faltering. And then there's the elephant in the room, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or the GERD.
Right, the GERD dispute is arguably the most potent flashpoint on the entire continent right now.
Explain that for us real quick.
Sure, so we're talking about a massive hydroelectric dam built by Ethiopia on the Blue Nile. The geopolitical friction here is basically existential.
Because of the water.
Exactly.
Right.
Ethiopia sees this dam as its absolute sovereign right and its ticket out of poverty, a way to generate electricity for millions.
But Egypt doesn't see it that way.
Not at all. Egypt relies on the Nile for roughly 97% of its fresh water.
Wow, 97%.
Yeah. So Cairo views any disruption to the river's flow as a literal threat to the survival of the Egyptian state.
And despite this being a dispute over the lifeblood of millions of people, a dispute that threatens to trigger a regional war between two massive military powers, U.S. diplomacy has been remarkably quiet.
Very quiet.
They aren't launching any serious high-level mediation. And they are also offering no solutions to Ethiopia's very aggressive, very public demands to secure sovereign access to the Red Sea, which is terrifying neighboring coastal states.
Right. And if you aren't addressing the survival of the peace treaty in Tigray, and you aren't mediating the existential water dispute on the Nile.
And you're ignoring the border tensions over port access.
Exactly. Then you are not building a regional architecture.
Which forces us to look at this through a completely different lens. If they're ignoring the foundation, they aren't trying to build a house at all. They're just setting up a temporary toll booth.
That's a great analogy.
And this leads directly to Dr. Negusu's second interpretation. Washington is not playing chess. They are playing checkers.
The skeptical view.
Right. Arguing that there is no grand design. The United States is simply executing a narrow, highly transactional agenda.
Yeah. Dr. Negusu frames this as transactional diplomacy in strategic packaging.
I like that phrasing.
It really hits the nail on the head. It's a shift away from the ambitious, comprehensive peace settlements of the past, focusing instead on immediate, highly practical, short-term returns.
So if they aren't trying to permanently stabilize the region, we have to look at what they are actually trying to extract. What's on the shopping list?
Well, the shopping list is very revealing. According to the analysis, Washington is laser-focused on counterterrorism operations, securing military access agreements, facilitating the sale of defense equipment, and grabbing a seat at the table for the exploding competition over critical minerals.
Let's break down the mechanics of those goals, maybe starting with the maritime routes.
Sure. So the Red Sea is currently experiencing unprecedented volatility, particularly with persistent attacks on commercial shipping.
Right.
The cost of global freight insurance has just skyrocketed. Ships are being forced to reroute around the entire continent of Africa, bypassing the Suez Canal entirely.
Which is insane logistically.
It is. It adds weight to delivery times and burns millions of dollars in extra fuel per voyage.
And that rerouting is exactly why this feels so relevant to you listening right now. When a cargo ship carrying, I don't know, lithium-ion batteries or consumer electronics has to add 2 weeks to its journey, the cost of those goods goes up at your local store.
Yep. The supply chain shock drives inflation.
Right. So from Washington's perspective, getting military access to ports in the Horn to protect those shipping lanes is an immediate burning necessity. They need bases to launch patrols and project power.
Furthermore, the Horn of Africa is sitting on vast, largely untapped reserves of critical minerals.
The rare earths and metals.
Exactly. The stuff that's absolutely essential for the global transition to green energy, from solar panels to electric vehicle batteries.
And the U.S. knows it's behind on this.
Severely lagging behind competitors in securing these supply chains. So, transactional diplomacy means prioritizing a deal that grants an American mining firm access to a specific region.
Or securing a port lease.
Right. Doing that rather than spending a decade trying to solve the ethnic tensions within that specific region.
It's the geopolitical drive-through model.
The drive-through model. I like that.
Well, it is. Washington is pulling up to the window, ordering a number 4 maritime security access with a side of lithium extraction, paying the toll, and driving away.
Yeah.
They are intentionally compartmentalizing. They want the benefits of the region without taking on the burden of the neighborhood's underlying problems. But here's where it gets really interesting for me. Isn't this incredibly risky?
Oh, massively risky.
Right. Treating a highly volatile region like a drive-through carries an immense risk, because if you are just extracting what you need while the structural foundations are collapsing, eventually the roof caves in on your operation.
That's exactly it. And Dr. Negusu's analysis is a stark warning about the dangers of treating the symptoms while entirely ignoring the underlying diseases.
Yeah.
Because the diseases, the structural pressures we discussed, they are not going to resolve themselves. And ignoring them is perilous.
Give us an example.
Well, you cannot effectively run a counterterrorism operation or operate a secure naval facility if the host nation is collapsing into a civil war. Sudan is a prime example.
Right.
The state is literally tearing itself apart, creating this massive humanitarian disaster and a vacuum that extremist groups are just eager to fill.
And Ethiopia has its own internal issues, too.
Exactly. The internal tensions within Ethiopia, specifically between the Amhara and Oromia regions, are consistently simmering just below the boiling point.
So if the anchor state fractures internally, all the bilateral dialogue frameworks in the world won't secure those trade routes. Your maritime security evaporates the moment the government you sign the lease with loses control of the coast.
Right. And this vulnerability really highlights the core argument of Dr. Negusu's critique. The United States is not operating in a vacuum.
No, they definitely aren't alone there.
The most damning element of the transactional approach is revealed when you contrast it with the behavior of every other major player in the Horn.
What are the others doing?
Well, while Washington is playing tactical, short-term checkers, securing a dialogue framework here or a temporary port access deal there, The regional and global powers are playing aggressive, long-term strategic chess.
Yeah, the geopolitical board is incredibly crowded, and the other players are executing strategies that physically alter the landscape.
For example, look at the United Arab Emirates.
Oh, the UAE is making huge moves.
Huge moves.
Mhm.
The UAE isn't just signing diplomatic memorandums, they are laying concrete.
Right.
They're utilizing state-owned logistics giants, like DP World, to systematically acquire, build, and operate commercial ports all along the African coast.
And the mechanism there is brilliant. By controlling the commercial port infrastructure, the UAE gains profound economic leverage over the host nations. Furthermore, a commercial port can easily be transitioned to berth military vessels. The UAE is building physical networks of influence that outlast any single election cycle.
And they are also deeply involved in funding and training local security forces to protect those specific economic interests. They're embedding themselves into the region's DNA.
And Turkey is executing a very similar, highly embedded strategy.
Oh, absolutely.
They aren't just selling weapons, they are fundamentally altering the balance of power. During the height of the Tigray War, Turkish drone sales literally saved the Ethiopian federal government from collapse.
Yeah, that creates a level of diplomatic leverage that a standard trade agreement simply cannot match.
Not at all.
Turkey also operates a massive military training base in Somalia, physically rebuilding the Somali National Army. They're making themselves an indispensable long-term security partner.
And the contrast continues across the board. Saudi Arabia is actively attempting to construct a formal Red Sea Council, right?
Yes, a regional security architecture explicitly designed to manage the waterways and potentially exclude external powers.
Wow. And then Egypt, driven by the existential threat of the GRD, is aggressively forging military and diplomatic ties with Sudan, Somalia, and Eritrea.
Basically attempting to encircle Ethiopia to force concessions on the Nile waters.
Even Israel is quietly deepening intelligence and security partnerships to secure its southern flank.
Right.
And then, of course, looming over all of this is China.
China's approach is perhaps the ultimate example of the long game.
The Belt and Road Initiative.
Exactly. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing isn't just trading, they're building the physical arteries of the region. They financed and built the Addis Ababa-Djibouti Railway, linking landlocked Ethiopia to the sea.
And they hold massive portions of the national debt of these countries.
Yeah. In Djibouti, which hosts China's first overseas military base, Chinese loans account for a staggering percentage of the country's GDP.
Wow.
That kind of debt-trap diplomacy, combined with massive infrastructure ownership, buys decades of undeniable political compliance.
So when you look at the board in its entirety, the contrast is jarring. You have the UAE buying the ports, China building the railways and holding the debt, Turkey arming and training the militaries, and Saudi Arabia trying to write the security rules.
Yep. They are establishing deep, permanent leverage.
And in the middle of all this, the United States is essentially asking for a temporary parking pass while trying to avoid dealing with the neighborhood association.
Which brings us to the historical warning embedded in Dr. Negusu's work. The history of the Horn of Africa severely punishes short-term thinking.
Really? How so?
Well, external powers that attempt to parachute in, extract immediate transactional gains, and ignore the structural realities always find themselves trapped.
Because they didn't invest in the underlying stability of the house.
Exactly. The walls keep shifting. They end up spending all their political capital and resources endlessly patching cracks, responding to one unexpected crisis after another, rather than operating from a position of secure institutional strength.
It is the difference between shaping the environment and constantly reacting to it. And the stakes of this game go far beyond the borders of the Horn, right?
Wow.
I mean, so what does this all mean for the listener?
It means everything.
If the U.S. fails to establish a stabilizing presence, and these structural crises, the GDR dispute, the collapse of Sudan, the friction over the Red Sea, if they're left to spiral, the vacuum won't just be filled by rival powers, it will be filled by chaos.
Pure chaos.
And that chaos disrupts the maritime shipping lanes that keep global prices stable.
Yeah.
It disrupts the critical mineral supply chains that power modern technology. It creates fertile ground for international terrorism to take root, demanding massive, costly military responses down the line.
Yeah, the synthesis of Dr. Negusu's analysis is clear. The era of strategic drift for Washington in the Horn of Africa appears to be over. They are actively reopening doors and re-engaging. But the great unresolved question is, what lies behind those doors? Are these diplomatic moves the foundation of a genuine chess-like strategy for regional stabilization?
Right.
Or are they merely fragmented tactical checkers moves? Short-term plays for access that will ultimately be washed away by the deeper currents of regional instability.
The pieces are definitely moving, but the strategy driving them remains entirely opaque.
Mhm.
And that leaves us with a really profound concept for you to mull over. We have spent this deep dive exploring how the United States might be shifting toward a drive-through model of transactional diplomacy, prioritizing quick returns over the heavy, difficult work of building regional architecture.
Mhm.
But if the world's traditional superpower is voluntarily stepping back from playing grand strategic chess, abandoning the long-term stabilization projects of previous eras, what does the future map look like?
It's a huge question.
Are we entering an age where the blueprints for global stability, the infrastructure, the security pacts, the actual rules of the road are no longer drawn in Washington? If the major power only plays checkers, does that mean regional middle powers like the UAE and Turkey are actually the ones building the geopolitical architecture of the 21st century?
It is a fundamental shift in how the globe operates. If
Oh,
you
right.
only rent the space, eventually the people who actually own the building are going to dictate the terms.
That completely changes how you look at every headline. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the shifting sands of the Horn of Africa. Keep your eyes on that critical bottleneck where the Indian Ocean meets the Red Sea. The strategies are complex, the elbows are incredibly sharp, and the game is far from over. Keep questioning the narratives, look for the mechanisms behind the diplomatic handshakes, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.